Welcome everybody to our 92nd seminar that we've started since last March, March of 2020, and been having a great time doing these. Lots of varied subjects, and today is the second of a series that we've started on professional driver coaching and what they look for and how they look at data, maybe video, and just the overall makeup of what they do in driver coaching. And the previous one that we had before, and maybe some of the guys might link it into the chat box, was with Thomas Merrill, and our guest today is Marc Miller. And a couple things for us. We would just like to share here as we kind of go into it. We're going to have a bunch of questions come in from our live attendees. If you're watching this on YouTube later, all of the links that I mentioned and the questions that get asked, some get answered in text and some we answer live. Everything we talk about here, to the links, the questions are all going to be down in the description box of this YouTube video if you're watching it later. Those of you watching it here live, it'll be in the chat box. And of course, you can always go to YouTube and grab those links later. So appreciate that. I'd like to introduce our guest today. And it's a fellow that I've known like 20-25 years, and Marc Miller is our guest today. He's been in professional motorsports for a long time and doing a great job. It's kind of cool that he's worked so hard and made a way to do what he loves. And welcome, Marc, into our webinar series. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Roger. It's a pleasure. I was really excited when you asked me to do this, because we have known each other a lot longer than even you and I realized. I think exactly. Earlier today we were talking about it, and it was like, yeah, that's been since the 90s. Wow, that's a long time. So,
but we did meet around the AIM world, and when I think we met it was certainly the late 90s, and in a karting context up at MRP up in Michigan, up in your neck of the woods. And we worked a lot, and you were mentioning that you got a very early data system as part of your very early racing. What's a little bit about that? How'd you get into data?
Well, I went to a trade show in karting. It was called KMI, Kart Marketing International, and at the time it was kind of middle America, so it was out in St. Louis area. So and it had since moved around, since then. But I met the two Mikes from AIM, and that was a long time ago, and they were just getting involved in importing this great system. And it was the Micron, I think it was the Micron 2, it was the first multi-display, like other than Digitron had two displays, but it wasn't really telling you much. This thing actually recorded and data logged, and it was a neat little system, and I brought it home. Like from there, I purchased it. I convinced them to let one of the show samples go, which, and later found out it was the second one ever imported into the States. So I was pretty happy that I was a trendsetter back then. Yeah. But I used it quite often and learned a lot on my own, because, I bugged, Mike and Mike quite a bit. But from there, I really learned the value of having data acquisition on even the go-karts back when I was racing them. And not a lot of people did that. They had, obviously they'd have tax, or they have things that would store max RPM for them, but nothing that really logged the data and could map things out. So it was a great step ahead for me, and it helped me with my learning curve right away.
Yeah, that's where we started at AIM, was in the karting field, right? And we had an original Micron 1, we just called it the Micron at the time, right? And then then that Micron 2 came out within a year or two. In fact, I believe it was 1999, and it was a game changer, right? You even eventually you could even download and go into the software, the old race studio software. So pretty cool. I'm glad you've been around so long doing that, and have enjoyed it. And I'm sure a lot of the stuff you learned at that point is still being used today. So, and we'll talk a lot about in depth on how you look at data here in just a moment. Let's bring up a slide to talk a little bit about Marc and some of the stuff that that he does. Like it says, he started in karts at age 11, so started quite a while ago. Been around this for quite a while. Competed in, and I followed along with this. Watched you as you were up there in the Canadian tire series up there in Canada, and that had to be that'll be maybe a little bit interesting to chat about for just a second. Raced in the MX5 Cup Continental Sports Car Tire Challenge, wins and poles, and then you even stepped it up, and then you went to 2018, started racing in sports cars, not only across the North America here, but globally. So kind of a cool thing, Spa, Suzuka, and I know you even got a chance to go and race at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I hope to chat about that for just a second. As you know, because we've known each other a little bit in that world. Endurance racing is a favorite thing of mine. 25 Hours of Thunderhill, I know you've won at least once, maybe twice. So a big deal to me. I just love endurance racing. 2019 won the Trans Am TA2 championships. We're getting up kind of current stuff, and the one that I like the most, you earned that Mark Donohue Technical Excellent Award for your focus on data engineering, car development, those things. I think that's a special award, and it's kind of cool that you did that. And currently running for Gradient Racing in the WeatherTech Championship GTD. Cool car, got a picture of it there. Talk a little bit about that. Mark and I, while we met in the late 90s, we got to know each other even more in the Mazda MX-5 Cup Series, where when my son was able to move up and run the MX-5 Cup Series for a year, we were traveling places every track other than Portland he had never seen, and Mark was brought on as he was there with the team as a coach, and drove a race or two here or there as you could fill it in, but big help to my son Andrew as we were going around trying to learn all the tracks. So that's where we really got to know each other. A little bit of background there about you, Mark. Anything? Certainly we missed tons of stuff. I mean, 25 years in motorsports, but give us a little bit about anything I may have missed, and a little bit about the Le Mans deal. What you thought about that, and how much fun did you have over there?
Well, I mean, anyone who's seen the movie and knows the name Le Mans, the small town in France, knows that it's pretty much the pinnacle of sports car racing, endurance racing. I was lucky enough to, interestingly enough, I met Bill Riley when I was racing go-karts, and I had always kind of stayed in touch with Bill for years and years. And from MX5 Cup, my success in MX5 Cup and racing in the Continental Tire Series for CJ Wilson Racing, which is now Gradient Racing, with the long history. I think I've been with that team for almost 9 years now, over 9 years, since about 2010 or 11. And just having that rapport with him, I got an opportunity to test for the factory Dodge Viper program before they were going to enter IMSA and go to do a factory program for Le Mans, try to go back as an American team, and didn't quite make the cut. But a year later, heading into 2015, Ben Keating was putting together another privateer bid to run Le Mans, and did a runoff as a bronze driver because I had not raced internationally, and was able to go join that team at Le Mans. And I actually was able, my GT career started essentially in 2015, before GS, GT4, before any of that, which that started a year later. I was finding myself at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca in a Dodge Viper in the GTD category, starting for the first time, and qualified outside pole and led the first 45 minutes, just because they wanted me to have experience around prototype traffic. Which, the interesting thing about that is I had raced Continental Tire Sports Car Championship for so long, and running in the ST class, you're pretty much surrounded by lots of faster cars.
Yeah.
And also racing a Miata at the time, or MX-5. Every straightaway, you're around just about everybody is faster than you. So I was pretty used to having that, using my mirrors and minimizing my losses in traffic. So I really enjoyed it. And in 15, went to Le Mans with the team, and really we had a great run. We led for 6 hours. We were in contention right up until the end for a podium. We just didn't have the luck when it came to keeping the gearbox alive, and lost some gears and ended up retiring. So with Le Mans, obviously the struggle there is, I've been there twice. I went back and the following year for WeatherTech racing, paired with Cooper McNeil and Lee Keen. And if you see me standing next to either one of those, you'll wonder how I even fit in the car, but it really wasn't that difficult, because when you get an opportunity to race Le Mans, you kind of like fill whatever void you can. So I was on my tippy toes a lot, but Cooper ended up getting sick. So Lee and I were gonna compete just as a two-man team. And we started the race and we ended up leading the first couple hours. And actually we're running pretty competitively, but that race ended up short early as well. So two leading cars at Le Mans, no finishes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a struggle, but the experience just carries on.
Yeah, but what an experience! What an experience! Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that opportunity kind of gave me a lot of confidence to be able to race GT4, GT3, and since then I've done a lot of both of those, and have won. We've won Petit Le Mans in the Viper for the last race, the Viper in 16. Won a SRO World Challenge race in 19 with Gradient Racing at Mosport, while I was racing TA2 as well. So I kind of did double duty. I was going back and forth between the TA2 car and a GT3 car, which was a lot of fun. And then obviously, if I can keep doing that, that's just going to be better for me. I filled in with a lot of teams in some of the long races, like Black Swan Racing and Riley Motorsports, 74 Ranch program at Sebring. And we've had a lot of good races on the podium or in contention to win. So I feel like I bring a lot to the table, but a lot of it, since I don't have a lot of seat time or testing with any of the teams, I have to really use data to get myself up to speed right away. And usually I'm fairly conservative in the first practice session, and then I sit down and I do my homework, and then, by the time the race comes, I'm prepared. So
it's go time.
That's
right?
Having all that background and knowledge in data acquisition and understanding of where that will lead me has really helped me in my career, particularly when I get very limited amount of seat time. I coach people that also don't get a lot of seat time because they're running companies, international companies or something like that. So they don't have a lot of seat time. So we have to really prepare them the best I can. And a lot of them actually get more seat time than I do. So it's kind of interesting.
Part of the deal sometimes,
it's
right?
Part of the deal. So
yeah. The one thing you said there that I thought I would touch back on before we jump into some of the specific driver coaching stuff was you talked about the team wanted you to get some experience with being passed by the prototype cars, and I remember the 25-hour races at Thunder Hill, and I don't know which one it was, and I'm sure you were there for one or two of them, but there was in the MX5 or Spec Miatas are very, very popular in those races, and there was a couple of Daytona prototypes that were out there at the same time, right? And so now you got not only a difference between your Viper and a prototype, but now you got a Spec Miatas and prototypes. You really had to keep your eyes open what was coming up from behind in a hurry, right? So it's kind of funny.
For sure, that race, the 25-hour Thunder Hill, is a great preparation for multi-class racing, but it's multi-class racing for them is 10 to 15 different classes, not 2 or 3. So it's really, really different. And we always have issue with multi-class racing because you have multiple drivers as well, and some drivers are not quite as quick, or some are more aggressive, and you really kind of need to know who's in that car at that time to really size everything up. And with the 25-hour Thunder Hill, none of that knowledge or information is available to you. Yeah. So you're left to your own devices out there, and I think it's just great.
Yeah, it is a spectacular event, isn't it? For an amateur road race, it's a spectacular event. Let's jump into a little bit about coaching philosophy. You've touched on a couple things there as you went, and we've got some pretty good questions in the question and answer already. But let's start it off with a couple of other things. Is it preparing for you've got a week coming up where you're going to go do a couple of testing days or something with a coach? I'm sorry, with a client that you haven't worked with before. How do you prepare, and how do you wish for the client to prepare to make sure that you're as successful as possible?
Well, for me, I've always learned that you arrive to the track completely prepared. So I typically will do a Zoom call or a conference call with that client ahead of time and kind of get what their experience level is, what car they're in, obviously what data system it's in, because some cars, use maybe an older data system that I need a refresher course, because I want to be as efficient as possible when I arrive to the track. And then depending on what facility, what track we're going to, I'll do a corner by corner and video or visual reference paired to a video, so that they know basically every reference point that they need to be looking at approaching each corner. Because if I can do that, it's something I don't have to do at the track. It gives them reference points ahead of time. Things sink in a lot quicker. And if I know what car they're in, I can kind of figure out my reference points and what they may change, because that's going to change based on if they're racing an MX-5 Cup car and they're 30 or 40 miles per hour slower, if they're in a Trans Am car or a GT1 car where, their braking zone is backed way up because they're going 180 miles per hour at the time. So if I know that ahead of time, then I can create those reference points ahead of time, get their eyesight in the right spots, get their mindset in the right spot. And things seem to kind of happen a little bit easier once we get to the track, and their first session is a little more efficient.
Interesting that, yeah, you're using modern technology to really jumpstart the day, right? So you're really a session or two, possibly even ahead at the track when you're there, and there's so much value in that because you build as you go through a weekend, right? And so it is so much value to do some of that stuff ahead of time. That's pretty cool.
You're also building confidence right away too, because
rapport.
A lot of time, yeah. Track time is expensive and hard to come by. Yeah. So even better if we can do a session or two on a simulator. A lot of my clients have simulators, so we can do simulation session. We can do a little pre-data with live telemetry ahead of time, and just anything to prepare them to make the investment once they get to the track a lot more efficient and effective. Then we're going to try to do that, because the cost of time is really valuable. So if you could put a little bit of time in ahead of time, then they're going to be better off.
Yeah, huge added value to the program, obviously. When you do your driver coaching, we've got a couple of options, right? We've got data and we've got video. Where do you stand on that? And just as the two different ones, and we'll talk about in the data what channels are important and stuff in just a second. But how do you view the data versus video question?
Well, I've heard the term "data doesn't lie" since I started doing data analysis, and typically, depending on what data you have access to, like, I really don't care to need video right away. And video is great to see driver attitude, where they're looking, where they're placing the car. But I can also see all of that on data traces and data plots, and get, I would say 80 to 90% of my idea of what their habits are, what their trends are, what their technique is, all ahead of time, or all right there, without really reviewing video. So I'm really data oriented. I'm really into, taking in as much of that as possible, seeing what I see in like a speed trend, and then adjusting and adding the data I need to kind of support my thought on what's happening. And then you can always go to video after that to kind of double check or check your homework, basically follow up with it. And typically I use the video more so to as a training tool for them, because a lot of people don't see what I see in the data, and it's not always super efficient to teach them all of that during a test day. So I can take what I want, show them bits and snippets of it, and then really push the agenda using the video. And that is also very helpful. So, but for me, the trend to start with is very data driven, not necessarily throwing it up on a big screen for them to see, but for me to actually see what's going on, quick assessment, and then make notes and adjustments based on that. And that's been the most effective for my clients.
Perfect. And we have a thing that and going back to last week's with Thomas Merrill, he talked, we have a thing that we've been using for years called what happened, where did it happen, and why did it happen? Really the things you need to dig into in data. There are lots of techniques to get there, but really at the end of the day, you need to know, what happened, where did it happen, on entry, on middle, exit, and then why, and then you can resolve it. And Thomas talked about because of the clientele, maybe video worked for them fairly well. You could show them the why a lot better on the video for some people. Some people get the squiggly lines fairly quickly, but a lot of people, it's that first step is video or the really fine tuning of it. See the little tiny bits in the video. So that's kind of interesting that's the posture that you take as well.
Communication is a very big part, and people communicate differently. So finding out just by having discussions with them what really kind of hits the mark for them is kind of the first step for me. One of the reasons I went to school was not really for a backup plan. I went to college for just to be better at what I wanted to do with my life. So, public relations and marketing and psychology and all those business attributes, as well as the psychology part of it is really understanding how people communicate and what really drives them, and where I can fill the gaps and create communication with them. And really, like, you can have people that really can pick up on the data and can see what's happening in the video, but it doesn't really effectively make them change their habits. So, seeing that they have it is the first step. Seeing a habit and seeing how it can be a negative or a positive, those are all great things, but to actually convince them to make a change is really the challenge. So how do you convince them to, release the brake a little slower, or you start the turn in a little earlier, and all of that, I think, is a combination of things. And for some people, they see data, they get it right away. It's like, oh, I need to do this, and it's really effective. Other times you have to use every tool available to you, data, video, tricking their brain into thinking something else. Like, okay, well, I swear I'm braking at the 400 marker. I swear I'm braking at the 400 marker. It's clearly the 450 to 500. They're a whole marker different. So do you want me to still tell you to brake at the 300, and your brain will automatically adjust 100, because they have to think about that and see the realization. In the video, you can show them that, but in the data based on a baseline lap, you can show them that, and then how it affects what the outcome may be. So sometimes you have to paint the picture using all the tools to really get the change to happen. Sometimes you just need to tell them to go deeper, but that's one of those things that I rarely ever do. I have to build a lot of trust and rapport with someone, and know that they're doing everything right in every other facet to make it work. So it just depends on what you're looking at. But like I mentioned before, I can see a lot of that, a majority of that, in the data before I have to review a bunch of video to go on top of it.
Yeah, it's interesting from the driver coaching standpoint, and then from the driver standpoint, right? From the person that's being coached. You're not only having to dig your way down through to find areas of improvement, all the different things that you do, but you're also watching closely and listening to the driver, the clues that they're giving you on what the ways that they want to hear it and see it. And if you're the driver, make sure that you're talking to your coach and say, no, I'm not getting that. Help that process along for those that are going to be coached, and let them know what ways that might help understand that a little bit better. To dig in a little bit more, let's take our first question from the question and answer. David Arkin asks, where do you ask, since we were just talking about that, you were talking about watching the video and breaking markings and some other things, where do you ask people that you coach to focus their view, their eyes, when they're approaching a corner? They're setting themselves up. They've got to get out there where they can arc the car in. They can't, cheat in on the corner. Then they're looking for the apex, all these different things. How do you coach a driver through that side of it?
Well, and that goes back to that early preparation. Typically what I'll do for a track, a corner to corner report is I'll do photos of the reference point. So let's say there's a braking marker and we're in that, or a hash mark in the line, or a specific permanent, marker, curbing, those type of access roads, all things that we use typically. And a lot of us drivers don't even think about it.
Exactly.
We've got the hundreds of thousands of laps on a track. We don't even think about it. So you ask a pro, it's like, well, what's your braking marker for turn 5? And it's like, I don't know, and you have to actually go back and look at video to see where it is. So a lot of that times for references, you may not know the actual reference, but I do know where I'm looking. So when I go through a video and I'll say, well, I'm looking here and I'm scanning here, and by the time I get here, I need to be scanning here. Those are the things, the picture I try to paint for a client, just to keep their eyes up and them looking ahead. And it's not enough to say, eyes up. It's like, that's just like such a general term to keep your eyes up, but you're always scanning. But if you can create a procedure for anyone, then, and it turns into a system, then you get consistency and repeatability. And that's really where lap times come from. It's like, I love to see eclectic laps and I love to see, rolling lap and stuff, but I'd rather see 10 laps within 2 or 3 tenths to build on, and then just keep moving that forward. And a lot of that repeatability comes from line of sight and visual references and creating that looking ahead process. So a lot of those references and line of sight things I've predetermined, and I'm giving them so that they're scanning and staying ahead. So I don't have to constantly tell them, keep your eyes up.
Is that a process that you work on? You start working with a new client, the first thing is to get them consistent, smooth, and balanced, and then you work on speed. Is that how you kind of follow that process?
Well, it's not. When you do the procedures and you are following that work, and you make sure the technique's right and where they're looking right, you automatically get the consistency. And then it kind of, from the consistency, you'll start to see the drop in lap times, because now that, like I mentioned before, you can, if a driver needs to go to the 3 marker instead of the 5 marker, but their technique is not correct for braking, and they're not going to make it if they go to the 3, then you get the technique right, and then you get the process right, and you get the vision right, and then you get them to push the braking zone, and then the lap times come down without the sacrifice of consistency. Because all the procedures are in place, all the systems are in place, all the techniques in place. Now it's just confidence. And so you can kind of dissect if they have technique right, or they're, some of those things are in place. I've worked with very, established gentleman drivers that their braking technique was incredible, but they just weren't looking at the right spots. So they would always, brake a little early. And then their biggest issue was having long min speeds in the middle, where they're just kind of rolling, or they're going to gas too early, and they always have an understeer in the middle of the corner, or they're always like running out of track on the exit. But their technique for braking was just impeccable. So from there, it was more vision,
Yeah.
changing their references, changing their approach to that part, and everything else fixed itself. It's because all they did was shorten the middle of the corner. So they weren't doing anything wrong other than just being early. But if you could see
one
that,
fix fixes,
yeah,
three or four different things.
Yeah. But to actually go in and be able to tell them, explain that to them and explain the process, and then show them with data and show them with video, and then say, really all we're having to do is get our eyes at this point, and you're going to go to there and then do everything else you've been doing. It's like a huge eye opener for them. But you also have to be specific. It's like, if they're only doing that in 2 corners, they can't just go deeper everywhere and make it. So you have to say, like, this is where we're going to find this time. And a lot of times you'll get drivers that once they see gains, then they continue to try to make gains every corner, every lap, until they either go off or make a mistake. And then again, that's like, now we're going against that consistency and repeatability, which is what's the foundation of going faster and racing well. Like, the goal is to race well and finish every race, because that's going to be better than setting the fast lap and watching half the race from the sideline.
Yeah.
So to tell their family that, they've spent the vacation money on getting damaged, which is the worst. So it's like, you get in that situation and you really need to make sure that, you're specific with the goals and make sure that they're following along with it.
While everything we've been talking about is data, let's dig in a little bit deeper. And when you're looking at data, I've just got a picture here. We're going to bring up some live data here in just a moment. But before we do that, what channels are important to you? You've got your basics, right? Your speed, RPM, lap times, and then of course your driver inputs. Throttle, brake, steering, gear position. When you start working with somebody, what's your go-to? The top 3 or 4 things that you need in order to have a successful start of your driver coaching?
Well, like I mentioned before, I was very fortunate to start with data very early, and really the only data we had was all the G data. So it was GPS speed, lateral Gs, longitudinal Gs, and RPM if you put the wire on. So we had that. So I got really good at seeing all of those inputs and how they were in relation from karting and working with 9 to 10, sometimes 12 go-kart racers on a weekend at a time, just doing engineering and data analysis with them and just working with the kids and stuff. So I saw a lot of that in there. So my go-to is GPS speed and the shape of the curve. And you tie in lat G to it, then I can and RPM, then you can kind of see, particularly in go-karts, the difference between a lift and its turn of the steering wheel based on all of that. Once you start to line all of that up, you can really see not just what was done to affect it. And we go back to that, what, why, how situation. It's not just what happened, but how it all happened and how it affected it. And those are my go-to. But, for me, once you add brake pressure, throttle position, and maybe steering, not necessary because you have lateral Gs, but steering does help for engineering purposes, and also really how and when and how much they load the wheel. That's also effective. But I would love speed, brake pressure for me, because brake pressure is very, very effective, and throttle position. Those are my go-tos, in addition to the lat and the long G loads, because those are very helpful. If you have that, then you can get so much out of the technique and what they need to do to improve, to minimize their braking zone, to maximize their straightaways, to minimize their apex speed. Or I'll define that. I'm unlike a lot of people. When I say apex, I don't pinpoint a specific location on the track. For me, apex is your min speed, because you can be offline and I see it all the time. You can be offline by 4 or 5 feet and still go faster than the guy that's online because my apex is shorter. So if your apex is a minimum speed and the distance of the minimum speed, if it's shorter, it's going to be faster. And that's what generates that nice sharp V speed trace that we kind of look for, particularly in GT cars and sports cars and things like that. So cars that have a lot of weight and horsepower and a short amount of rotation, you need to create rotation very quick to have an effective in and out of the corner. So I look at that as apex is not a location on track, but a distance of minimum speed.
There you go.
So,
and you're making the resulting the following or resulting straightaway longer, right? And
right, exactly.
he who gets back to full throttle first is probably going to win that little battle, right, down the next straightaway. The and I remember I think it was you that was one of the first ones that mentioned to me and my son as he was coming up through that the driver's job was to manage the platform, and when you're moving your hands and you're moving your feet, you're moving weight around, right? And if you put all the weight on the front end, and if you're on the brakes hard and you're trying to turn hard and the track is going away, you've overran the outside front tire and understeer happens, right? So all those little inputs you talked about is all managing those four contact patches. It's kind of an interesting concept. Yeah. The one last thing before we actually jump into some of the data and look at some of those things from a coaching standpoint before we move on into some data. You're a coach. You've mentioned psychology a couple times already in today's discussion. That discussion of it, your job is to point out areas of improvement, right? And you can look at that as negative or reinforcing in different ways. But there's that whole thing of show the driver, the 4 or 5 things that he needs to do to get better. How much do you actually feed in? Well, here, look at this. This is where you've done a good job. That positive versus the negative balance. How do you attack that?
I'm under I have had a lot of good friends that have coached me as I have come up, and a lot of the times, you have to understand how people really absorb information. And I don't know, a lot of people that just love to hear negative stuff. So I tend to stay with positives. How I communicate with people is minimalize well, you should have done this, or because I look at this as coaching client relationship is a relationship, and you're not in a very good relationship when there's a lot of negativity. So you want to obviously provide a lot of feedback on what they're doing right, because when you can give positive feedback on all the things that they really are doing right, then it reinforces that, and they're going to continue doing that right. A lot of times, because tracks have multiple corners, it's a little tougher to do on an oval, but because a lot of the corners are very similar, you can apply those things they're doing right in some spots to other spots and say, listen, you're doing this so well here, but if you can make the association that this exit is the same exit as these 2 other corners, and you're not doing that there, and you can, because you have the ability to do it, the car has the ability to do it, let's do that, then you can make a quick, confident application to making that trend to change how they are functioning in 2 other corners, and you have a net gain. As far as pointing out some of the downsides of maybe trying to get them to change their technique in braking, if they're not braking hard enough, they're not braking hard enough initially, or they're holding the brake too long, a lot of these things, then I always try to reinforce the change and what the benefit of the change will give them. And that's also getting them to focus more on where their initial reference point is and the technique they have to do it. And we've even listen, here's what I want you to do. And I'll just take them and put them in the car and turn on the car, the ignition, and bring up the data and put it to brake pressure and say, close your eyes and run me through where you go into this turn and see where your brake pressure is at. And then now I want you to give me 400 more pounds of brake pressure. And
see what
this
that
is
feels
what that
like.
feels
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. There you go.
And it really, that's kind of like an eye opener to
Yeah.
other people, because
Interesting.
that's the brake pressure they have to be at if they want to shorten their braking zone. Because as you know, if you have 600 pounds of brake pressure, your braking efficiency is going to be X amount of feet. The only way to shorten that is to increase brake pressure initially to shorten that distance. And if you can't physically do that, or you don't know what it physically feels like, then it's not possible. So
Yeah.
you got to know your limitations with that. I've worked with clients that just physically can't push the brake pedal hard enough. So if that's the way it is, it's like, okay, well, we have a limitation. This is our limitation. We're going to work around this limitation. Your braking zone, unless you go do 100 squats a day,
Yeah.
or build that up, then we can't do that. But it gives them something to focus on when they leave the track as well, is to be able to physically live the part that they want. If you want to improve, this is one way we need to improve. And it's one of the things that I learned working with Michigan State University's kinesiology programs, doctor there, David Ferguson. After I was involved in a really bad accident, I went there and I went through a typical baseline training program. And I learned a lot of things about just me physically that I could improve to be better in the car. And that gives me a lot of opportunity to do the same for clients of mine that, okay, I know this is kind of what you do for a hobby, or this is what you want to do for fun, but obviously you want to improve. Here are other ways you can improve while you're not at the track. And it gives a whole another level of preparation to improve the results at the track, while also doing something that's healthy for them. So it's a benefit.
Dr. Ferguson was a guest of ours in one of our webinars, and had a long discussion about that with him. Matt Romanowski put us together and brought him on, and that was a very, very interesting discussion. Let's jump into some data, and then I want to cover a question that you just talked about, a question that was into the, and we got so many good questions, and we're not going to have enough time. But you
Sure.
mentioned just looking at some Race Studio 2 data here. This is data we've used in previous webinars. It's with Kit and Coke and the Road America data. You mentioned the V, right? Where you're looking at the shape of the speed at the apex. And the question that Art sent in is how do you get close to that speed trace V, the min speed in long corners, such as turn 2 at Thunder Hill or turn 6 at Sears? Do you diamond the turns, or are the faster corners just less of a V on top of it, right? Depending on the class and everything, obviously.
Well, I mean, this being Road America, if you go to, for instance, the carousel, which is, you can see it.
Yeah.
Carousel there.
This is a high speed, obviously. This is a high downforce car too.
This is a high downforce car, but in a GT car, this looks so much different in the carousel. Yeah. So I think one of the questions was a lot of corners, are 90 degree or maybe slightly less or a little bit more. But when you get to corners like anything called the carousel, so Thunder Hill as a carousel, Mid Ohio as a carousel, Road America as a carousel, where I was just yesterday, Black Hawk Farms has a carousel. There's multiple ways to do things, and it really depends on what kind of car you have. If you have a heavier car that you lose the front at a certain speed, and obviously it's heavier, higher horsepower. It just depends on the dynamic of the car. Also helps to know if you have ABS or not. Because if you're turning the wheel and you use a lot of front brake bias and a lot of front brake pressure, you can flat spot the inside front tire. So, any of those situations, you were going to look for the ability to drive the car in much harder, make the transition and make the car rotate in a shorter amount of time, and then accelerate off. So I look at the carousel at Road America, and like I said, in a GT3 car, it's not a constant, consistent speed going through there. You have to drive it in pretty deeper than you think. Otherwise, what happens is in the middle of the corner, you just now realize that you've overslowed the entry. So you start building back up speed that you should have carried in. And then now the time comes where you have to rotate the car and point it, and you can't anymore because now you've oversped the middle. So what you end up having is that really moderate speed in with a really great mid corner, and then not a very good exit. You know, when you look at a prototype, or this is probably like a prototype or formula car with a lot of aero or something like that.
DPO2.
So Elan, these type of cars just carry mid corner so well that you see a lot of point and shoot, just because the term I used, apex, before, the apex is actually really short naturally because the car carries speed so well. And you can maintain and increase speed all the way through, almost all the way through the carousel. So there's a little bit of a drop off and a dip, like where it's continuing speed, but it's just that little lift modulation out of the wheel will drop some of the speed down, but it should just be kind of a flat acceleration through the carousel with an aero car. But like I said, this is going to be quite a bit different. But you know, if you fast forward a little bit to, you know, a corner like after Canada Corner, the kink under the bridge here, you know, there's quite a bit of difference between the two,
between the coach and the student here in this particular case.
And that just comes from just maybe a stab of the brake, more steering input. And you can even see just in the longitudinal, that's a tap of the brake.
Yeah,
you can see it in the long, because steering is not going to affect it that quickly and that abruptly.
Right.
But just how much that speed loss really affects the rest of the corner.
The one I would like to look at, Mark, is turn one up here. I'm gonna zoom in just a tick, and which flattens out the apex V, for lack of a better word. But it's a fairly high speed corner in this particular case, a little over 100 miles an hour. When the faster you go, the less you end up with that defined V, is what common, you know, people would chat about. And do you see that as well? This is the fastest corner where he actually has a slowdown, a V min, and then an exit.
Right. So this, for me, this looks 100% more confidence driven. You see bigger initial brake hit.
Up here.
And when you line that brake pressure up right where the steering of GPS lateral starts, the car is starting to be rotated under almost full brake pressure.
Yep, still. Which
gives him the opportunity to really release full brake pressure quickly before he gets to full steering. And he's loaded the car much faster, more confidence in, which means he's off the brake sooner. And now he's got that ability to let the car roll just long enough before he picks up throttle. So you can see that brake release and roll right where it starts to flatten out a little bit, where that longitudinal, he has very little trail of brake, only to get the car, the nose to stay down long enough for the aero balance long enough, but is still on a little bit of light brake pressure, even with fully loaded steering. And he's using that to get the car to continue to rotate so he can go back to throttle sooner. So if you notice, like both drivers start to go back to throttle, because most people, regardless of how fast they're actually going through the corner, they really kind of know, okay, well, you know, Kenton's picking up the throttle here, so I'm going to start picking up the throttle there. The thing is Kenton has created more rotation quicker, so he can really commit back to full throttle. So even Kenton is at a point where his testing himself or judging himself briefly, there's a little bit of hesitation before he goes right back to full throttle. That's a shift point, but just before that.
Oh, okay, right here.
Right there at that little ledge. That's here's where I really want to pick up throttle. Okay, yeah, I'm good. And then full throttle. And you can kind of see a lot of that where his student is a little more progressive, going back to full, a little bit less confidence.
There you go. Okay.
And I like to see that you added a little brake pressure there.
Yeah.
As I was talking about it, and you can see, like, really it's not that the student doesn't have the confidence as far as the right brake pressure. Their brake shape is okay. I think their confidence is when they start to turn the wheel, and how soon. Like they're doing everything just a little earlier.
Yeah.
So now their brake distance is now longer. And because it's longer and it started earlier, they're obviously slowing down more
Yep.
to do it.
And then they also have a little bit of a hesitation, not as good with the footwork, right? As it's coming down and auto blipping, you can see that they come off just a tick there as well.
Right. Part of that being confidence and maybe a loss of reference point, because this being one of the fastest parts of the track, people start to focus on less on where my reference is and focus on, holy crap, I'm going pretty fast here. instead of really the job at hand. So you got to create that system and approach to make sure they have confidence. And that this technique kind of carries into the next corner too, where it's just now is the reference is okay, but you see the hesitation on the throttle. It's not I'm not going to carry throttle all the way to my reference point. This leans to me like maybe he doesn't quite have a reference point and he's not quite sure exactly where it is. So there's some hesitation on how far he's carrying that throttle. And there's a little bit of hesitation on how hard he hits the brake and commits to it for that initial brake hit, and is kind of hesitating. So my first rule is, how do we fix the hesitation? How do we fix the commitment level? How do we build your confidence and where you're looking and what reference points you have? So this little thing does not hurt your technique, because you will never get the technique right if you're always second guessing yourself.
Interesting that we've just looked at two corners, turn 1 and 2, and what the driver did was what you would coach them to do is two totally different things because of what the data is showing you. So interesting. Yeah, interesting how he's starting to roll off a little bit slow, and then when he does hit the brake, doesn't hit as much, and then finally does get a little bit more additional. And you can see,
I bet you can find 4 or 5 of those corners, particularly in hard braking zones where they're just now so full of information and data, they really don't have confident braking zones, confident reference points to really commit to it. And that's, for most of these cars, the difference between a pro and an AM is not, to a certain level. Once you get in higher levels and where the AMs are quite good, it just becomes commitment to those reference points and how willing you are to repeatedly like work in that zone. And a lot of AMs will drive over that zone just because they have a lot. It's not that they lack confidence, but they lack the consistency to I guess the references and being able to have that commitment to that repeatability. They're always just pushing themselves harder.
And in this case, we'll back up just a little bit, but you can see that the driver actually was pretty darn close from the speed trace with Kenton, right? The amateur, and as a matter of fact, maybe even a tick quicker, which then ended up over braking down deeper and waiting too long, and then ended up being slower. Kenton's car, by the way, had a lot less horsepower. But
if you really notice, like if you look at the braking distance, their braking distance was much longer. Just because they lacked that commitment and knowledge and to go for the initial brake pressure, which this all could have been resolved by references, by creating better references and commitment. Like a lot of those things would not have to carry that brake longer if you were 20% more effective on initial brake pressure.
Perfect.
So you could have been releasing the brake. You can see it was maybe going just a hair too fast to release the brake to get the car to rotate at that point. And if you're on the brake that hard, now you're in danger of, if you dropping speed, in danger of locking up the inside front tire if you're on a non-ABS car. I always, when I ran, because I was initially come from karting to open wheel and went from non-winged to winged cars, and the big learning was in F2000 and in Z-Tech cars was that addition of that aero downforce. You have to learn that there's a certain point where, wow, you can push the brakes all the way through the end, you can completely destroy your leg on brake pressure until you reached a certain point where that aero said, okay, I'm done. And then you'd lock up immediately. So knowing that space in between of where that is to get the most out of your initial brake pressure, but still be able to modulate to create the mechanical grip you need to continue for turn in and brake release and through the corner.
Interesting. This is a high downforce car. You mentioned earlier that the driver just may not have the leg strength, the ability to do it at first, right? And I remember years ago, I was at a Daytona prototype, 24 hours at Daytona, looking at some data with just watching. I just climbed up on the box with a couple people I knew, a high-end driver coach and a very prominent amateur, paying driver, owner of the team, and they were going into the bus stop at the back at Daytona, and with the amount of downforce that those cars had, with the size of the tires, they could not lock up the car. They could not get to that point during the roar, right? The run up to the 24-hour, and they were actually putting one foot on top of the other, trying to do some things, and then they went back in the 2 weeks in between, worked very, very hard on their leg work to get strong enough to be able to brake with the rest of the guys that were out there. Amazing amount of braking that can come with when you get that aero.
And also it varies from car to car.
Sizes.
You've got cars that have boosted brake system. When the GT4 came out, the Porsches came in GT4. It was a boosted system with a motorsport ABS that you treated differently than the racing brake system that had the motorsport ABS, because you would get into all sorts of different communication. With a boosted system, you can overboost it. It's very, very easy. When you have a lot of Champ Car and Lemons and a lot of these series that are running the 200 tread width tire, a lot of them will, the first thing they do is take the factory ABS out, and they continue with the boosted brake system. Then you're talking about very light amount of initial pressure in a very serious amount of modulation that you have to really be comfortable with and work with, because the brake pressure could be infinite and lock up so easily, the fronts or rears, depending on what the bias. A lot of these street cars that were made with ABS have naturally up to 70% or more front brake bias. Well, you take the ABS out and now you're just locking up fronts left and right. And people don't understand, maybe that's not the greatest thing. So I always try to recommend that you get, if you're know your vehicle, if you're going in with a motorsports ABS program, then you should do squats, because the amount of brake pressure that we use in GT3 cars to maximize performance on the track leaves most of us like kind of with a limp for a couple of days after the race, because we're just literally pushing the pedal as hard as we can for long periods of time for several hour stints. And you get in a car like something like a Formula car, and that has a lot of aero, you're not using that much brake pressure and for very long. And you're really utilizing the most of the aero and the dynamics of the car and the cornering abilities that it has, not so much the braking abilities. So I think with Thomas Merrill's thing, you used some Ferrari Challenge data, which I was really interested in when you mentioned it, because I've done a lot of work in Ferrari Challenge, and those cars stop so well, carbon rotors. A great ABS system. You can drive the car in a 3,000 pound car, you can drive in so deep and so hard into the corner, and it really gives you a lot of support. But to teach someone to build that amount of confidence,
hard.
Is very difficult sometimes.
Interesting. I have really enjoyed it. We're closing up on our time, but the ended up being a discussion not only about driver coaching, but with a focus on braking. And we haven't done as much of that on the data analysis side as we should have, because it's a hugely important part that I think a lot of people overlook. So I have just been tickled that we've done that. There's a couple of questions that, as we kind of go head off towards the end of this, what about right foot breakers versus left foot breakers? And one of the questions was, is it a visual thing for you? Do you have a time of 0.3 of a second, or how do you judge if somebody is getting off of the throttle onto the brake effectively, right foot or left foot braking?
So the right foot breaker and left foot breaker versus one or the other is really both are effective. I mean, I was teammates with Jerome Baliga-Mullen, who's a phenomenal sports car driver, one very successful, and he's a right foot breaker, and I'm a left foot breaker. So
you're next Carter. You're used to it
really well. The things that left foot breakers have to be careful of is overlap, because and it's not just lack of issue with performance, but particularly
Hard on
endurance racing, some of the things that I had to learn was there's a lot of crossover and overlap. And when you have that, then you're using up more brake material. You're basically, it could be a detriment to you.
creating a ton of heat too.
There's certain corners that left foot braking provides the opportunity to create, faster, more consistent times, but it's also said that could be said for other corner types for a right foot braker. So it really just depends. I think right foot versus left foot is really personal preference. The goal is to maximize what you do with what your style is. And that can always be done with looking at data.
And the speed from throttle to brake isn't 100% time as narrow as you can get it, because sometimes you want the thing to roll a little bit, but you want to shorten that up as much as possible without the overrun, right?
Right. And sometimes left foot breakers with a little bit of overlap are creating an understeer in a car that a right foot breaker won't have, just because they have that fraction of second longer of rotation that you really want, but you don't let it happen because you've taken the rotation out by going to throttle early. So, and that's why the mindset of, well, I went to throttle earlier, therefore I should be faster out of the corner. Oh, you have to also take into account vehicle dynamics and chassis and rotation and slip angle of the tire. And if you remove the slip angle that you need to get the best full throttle response to get out of the corner by going to throttle slightly earlier, that doesn't always result in a better result. So it all varies, which is why we have this great usage of data to vary depending on whatever car you're in, whatever application. You also have to apply it. I mean, data acquisition was started not for us drivers, but for the engineers. And it's really important for me to go back, and when I work with a client, I'm also working not just sometimes I'm engineering with them. A lot of the times we're working with teams. So I'm a conduit to making sure that what that driver is communicating when it is what they need, and it's not a bad habit or it's not a technique issue that we can resolve. I'm not changing the setup to satiate his habits, his bad habits. I'm trying to change his habits, but at the same time, when that driver needs something that it would benefit if we made a change to the car, I can convince the team to make the change. And I've been blessed to work with many very good customer-oriented programs that work with my clients that are phenomenal. But I've also worked with teams that not necessarily have been, they just put fuel in the car, make sure it has air in the tires, and ice in the cool suit box, and then that's it. And then make some changes. So sometimes you have to kind of force, hey, to get the most out of our driver, we need to make these changes to make the car better for them. So
a fantastic topic to add to our list, which is we're looking at data. Where do we draw that line? How do we make that call of driver versus car changes? That is a fantastic topic that we maybe we bring you back on that one, because that with your engineering background and your driver coaching background, I think that would be a very fun topic. Look at some data. The last one that I want to have you do while I kind of get the screen set up to close this up is David Arkin asks, and we have a lot of questions I wasn't able to get to. I apologize to everybody. We'll get some answers, and maybe even have Mark help us get some of the answers. Some of them are specific to him, but the average amateur does not get enough seat time, he says. Do you? And I see a lot of people do this, and I frankly do. I'm not a race car driver, but I even play this game sometimes. But do you have any street driving exercises for general skill improvement? The footwork or where your eyes look at, as you're just approaching a standard 35-mile-an-hour corner. Is there anything you do with that to send them home with?
I'm so anti doing stuff that you would do in a race car on a racetrack with a street car on the street. I'm just, if you saw what I drive around town, you would never know that I drive race cars for a living. So
no doubt, and I am too. I'm big on not taking your race activities, but it just I work anything. Do you do it? Do you teach anything?
I work is what I use. So
okay.
If you are ever riding with a friend that is always breaking crews on the highway or tapping the brake or gets caught in traffic jams, just slap them. Because the thing is like,
it's a frustration to me too.
That would be the biggest game for me, is to see what's coming ahead, predict what's happening, make adjustments before you need to make big adjustments. And those are things I use for racecraft just on the highway. And if I can predict what other people are going to do and stay ahead of it, that's a big gain for me. And that is huge, in a race car, in a race, in practice, qualifying, and in racing. And if you can put your mind in that mindset, it really will help you on race day. As far as cornering and braking techniques and things like that, not really. It depends. It depends on if you are tracking your car that you daily drive, then maybe. But I would also never encourage anyone to drive like they would on the track, on the street at any point. Just, for the safety of everyone else.
The other one I've heard a couple people say is if you are going to be in a car that does left foot braking, to go ahead and attempt just to get that feel of that left foot braking, a little bit modulation, maybe that helps a little bit as well. So perfect. I appreciate it. The going on to the some of that the engineering versus the car stuff, I think that would be fun. And back to your story as we kind of go into kind of closing this up. The one that bugs me the most, here's a personal thing, but I'm driving down the freeway and you've got that one car up there that is always tapping the brake lights because they're not paying attention, right? And they're always running up on somebody. It's like, and finally I get to the point where I just got to either back way off or pass them, or else it bugs me so badly.
It's always past them, Roger.
Yeah, no, I'm
always
trying.
Past them.
I'm an old man now, Mark. Come on. But I appreciate everything you've done here today. We've had some really good questions and some really good comments. I've really enjoyed talking about the braking side. That was fun. This video, for those of you that have watched this live, and maybe we went over some stuff fairly quickly, the videos always go to YouTube, and this will be YouTube video number 157 for us up there of just great content, like we've heard today from Mark, and they'll be up there within a couple of hours. I'll have that up there, and we work on the questions and answers and get those up there as soon as we can. We're a couple of weeks behind right now, but we're working on it, and so this will be up there fairly quickly, and take a look at this one. Plus, we talked a lot about the Thomas Merrill video from last week as well. So take a look at that. We're a customer support company that happens to sell racing electronics, and like Mark, customer support and service and making sure that the customer gets and the client gets what they need is important to us all. So I'm going to have some contact information for Mark in a moment. If you're at the racetrack or in midweek getting your car prepped and ready to go, give us a call and let us know if there's anything we can do to help you. That's what we're here for. So the next one, I knew this was coming, and Mark and I certainly did not discuss that we were going to talk about braking quite a bit, but it ends up being appropriate, right? I'm 99% that Ian can be here next week. He had just a couple of things he was trying to juggle to make sure, but I'm pretty certain we'll have him here, or else I wouldn't have put the slide up. But Ian Berwick is going to join us next week and talk about the better braking and data. He is a fantastic guy. I've known him again for just about as long as I've known Mark, and we're going to bring him in. He's going to talk about braking, not pad types and those kind of things, but just more of the knowledge that he has about braking. And then we're going to look at some data and try to tie it all together and get some of his information from him. And I think it'll be a great time. Look forward to seeing Ian next Tuesday here with us at our webinar series. So okay, perfect. Let's close it all up, Mark. Perfect presentation. I really enjoyed myself. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to the folks? We certainly got your social media information down there for if they want to contact you later.
Yeah, certainly. I'm open for questions or booking or training or anything you'd like to do through my social media channels, and definitely encourage you guys to tune in to first off, thank everyone for being here and listening to me and Roger talk about coaching and everything data acquisition. I've been a huge fan of data acquisition, like I said, from the very beginning, and put it to use daily in everything I do. So it's really important. Definitely encourage you to listen to Ian's discussion next week. Absolutely great company with Paget, and has been there a long time. Very knowledgeable guy. I've had long-winded technical discussions with him, and he is, as far as technical aspects of braking technology, he's one of the most knowledgeable guys I know, and I've leaned on him quite a bit for information. But thank you, Roger, and certainly AIM was my first data acquisition system, and some 20 plus years ago, and still use it regularly. It was testing yesterday in a car that had an MXL2. So used it in Trans Am, MX5 Cup. It has been a very, very versatile tool, from the Solo 2s to the MXLs to some of the newer, very well lit and full color units that were in the Trans Am cars last year. So appreciate the time and asking me to come on and be a part of this.
And I am serious. I'm going to get back with you, down the road. We don't want to take too much of your time all the time, but coming back as a driver coaching, and then the driver engineering versus the car engineering, looking at data, I think would be a great topic for us to chat about again later as well. So thanks everybody for coming. Again, I appreciate it. Again, we'll go to YouTube, watch all the videos when we get done with them there, and look forward to seeing everybody here 1 week from now. Talk to you guys soon. Have a good week.